of elections saw voter suppression taken to an entirely...
You can see the rest of this during prime time here on C-SPAN and anytime at cspan.org. The House is coming back in now for votes on bills debated earlier.
2383 by the yeas and nays, H.R. 1092 by the yeas and nays. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as a 5-minute vote. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2383, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2383, a bill to designate the new Interstate Route 70 bridge over the Mississippi River connecting St. Louis, Missouri and southwestern Illinois as the Stam Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. It's a 15-minute vote.
A couple of votes here in the House. This one to name a bridge over the Mississippi River that connects St. Louis and southwestern Illinois. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court today declared unconstitutional part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that determines which states and localities must get federal permission before they change their voting laws. Here's how reporters are writing about the decision. Bloomberg News writes, a divided U.S. Supreme Court threw out a core part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, rolling back a landmark law that opened the polls to millions of Southern blacks. And in the New York Times, the Supreme Court split along ideological lines with its ruling that Congress had not provided adequate justification for subjecting the states, mostly in the South, to federal oversight. Senator Lindsey Graham sent out a couple of tweets about the ruling. One of them says, as a South Carolinian, I'm glad we will no longer be singled out and treated differently than our sister states. South Carolina is one of the 9 states that's affected by the ruling. While Senator Graham supports the ruling, the Obama administration and civil rights groups said there's a continuing need for the federal law. Here's reaction from Attorney General Eric Holder.
Good afternoon. Today, the United States Supreme Court announced its decision in the case of Shelby County v. Holder and invalidated an essential part of the Voting Rights Act, a cornerstone of American civil rights law. Now, like many others across the country, I am deeply disappointed with the court's decision in this matter. This decision represents a serious setback for voting rights and has the potential to negatively affect millions of Americans across the country. In the nearly half-century since its initial passage in 1965, the Voting Rights Act has consistently enjoyed broad bipartisan support in Congress as well as the executive branch. After extensive hearings, Sections 4 and 5 of this important law were reauthorized, most recently in 2006, just 7 years ago, with the unanimous support of the United States Senate and the near unanimous support of the House of Representatives. This is a uniquely legislative function and responsibility that the Constitution expressly gave to Congress. The last reauthorization was signed into law by President George W. Bush, just as prior reauthorizations had been signed by Presidents Ford, Reagan, and Nixon, in accordance with core nonpartisan American values. After all, as Congress correctly recognized in the hearings held in 2006, racial and language minorities face significant voting discrimination in some parts of our country. Given the successful decisions in the Department's Voting Rights Act cases over the last 18 months, the need for a vital and intact Voting Rights Act remains clear. Last year, a federal court cited the value of the Voting Rights Act in blocking the Texas congressional redistricting map on the grounds that it discriminated against Latino voters. In that case, the court noted that the parties, and now I'm quoting, this is from the court, The court noted that the parties provided more evidence of discriminatory intent than we have space or need to address here. Provided more evidence of discriminatory intent than we have space or need to address here, unquote. The federal court that reviewed South Carolina's photo ID law also noted, and I quote, the vital function that the Voting Rights Act played in prompting the state to change how it will implement the statute in future elections so that it would no longer disproportionately impact black voters. Without the Section 4 coverage formula, neither of these discriminatory voting changes would have been subject to review, and both could have been implemented immediately. These are just two of many examples demonstrating that these problems have not been consigned to history. They continue to exist. Their effects are real. They are of today, not yesterday, and they corrode the foundations of our democracy. Our country has changed for the better since 1965, but the destination that we seek has not yet been reached. Indeed, a reading of today's opinions demonstrates that every member of the Supreme Court agrees with this fact. As the Chief Justice wrote, and I quote again, voting discrimination still exists. No one doubts that, unquote. This is why protecting the fundamental right to vote for all Americans will remain one of the Justice Department's highest priorities. The Department of Justice will continue to carefully monitor jurisdictions around the country for voting changes that may hamper voting rights. Let me be very clear. We will not hesitate to take swift enforcement action using every legal tool that remains to us against any jurisdiction that seeks to take advantage of the Supreme Court's ruling by hindering eligible citizens' full and free exercise of the franchise. As the President has made clear, Congress needs to act to make sure that every American has equal access to the polls. The Department also will work with Congress and other elected and community leaders to formulate potential legislative proposals to address voting rights discrimination. Because on their own, existing statutes cannot totally fill the void left by today's Supreme Court ruling. And I am hopeful that new protections can and will pass in this session of Congress. The Voting Rights Act has always had strong bipartisan support on Capitol Hill, and today's ruling should not change that. This is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue, because our democracy is founded on ensuring that every eligible citizen has access to the ballot box. Finally, we need to be clear about what happened today. Part of the Voting Rights Act, but not all of it, was struck down. The constitutionally protected voting rights of all Americans remain fully intact. And the right to vote, free from discrimination based on race or language, requires our vigilant protection. We know from many decades of long, hard struggle that the best way to defend a right is to go out and exercise it. So no one should conclude that today's unfortunate decision has rendered her or his voting rights invalid or has made attempting to cast a vote on Election Day futile. To the contrary, it is incumbent on all American citizens to stand up for their rights by registering to vote, by going to the ballot box, by exercising the most fundamental of all rights, and by voting for their preferred candidates of any party. Our democracy is dependent on each of us and on our active participation in the electoral process. Although today's decision represents a serious and unnecessary setback, the Justice Department remains committed to moving forward in a manner that's consistent with the arc of American history, which has always been a story of increasing equality, inclusion, and access to the franchise. This is what makes the United States of America truly exceptional, and this is what we will zealously guard. Thank you.
In Section 5, the salvage, Mr. General.
Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority decision in the Voting Rights Act case, saying that when Congress renewed the Civil Rights Law in 2006, lawmakers relied on 40-year-old data that does not reflect the changes in U.S. society. And the court, in its majority opinion, said that Congress may draft another formula based on current conditions. Civil rights groups also weighed in today. Representatives of the NAACP spoke from the steps of the Supreme Court.
And good morning to all of our friends and supporters, especially those who have LDF and Barbara and everyone who has been very supportive, and all the work that has gone into getting us to this point and representing our local units across the country. My name is Charles White. I serve as National Field Director for the NAACP. We come this morning yet affirming and its belief in Section 5. We heard, you know, in the court not saying much, but gave us, I think, the juice in what we continue to need in Section 5, that preclearance is important. We believe that the same advocacy work that we placed in working with members of Congress and the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act is the same kind of advocacy work our units across the field will place in making sure that the formula in Section 4 is one that is just and fair, but represents the people in the jurisdictions that are covered. Again, we thank all those who have worked hard with us, work hard on behalf of many people across this country who come from the jurisdiction in which we talk about. They are our members, they are our loyal supporters, and today I think is yet a victory moment for us. It still marks that there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm going to now turn to our friends from LDF, who has been with us and leading on the litigation part of this part of the lawsuit, and I'm going to ask now LDF to please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherilyn Ifill. I'm the President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I'm joined by my colleague Ryan Haygood. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, as you know, is one of the nation's leading civil rights law organizations. We have worked on voting rights issues since the Voting Rights Act was enacted, and in fact even before, and we are part of the team that litigated the Shelby County case. We argued the case on February 27th before the Supreme Court. We represent black voters in Shelby County, Alabama. It goes without saying that we are deeply disappointed by the court's decision today. Make no mistake about what has happened. The court has decided that it stands in a better position than Congress to determine how to protect voting discrimination. The 15th Amendment to the Constitution makes clear that it is Congress that has that power. And in 2006, when the Voting Rights Act was up for reauthorization, Congress exercised that power responsibly and in a bipartisan manner. Over 9 months they held hearings. They accumulated 15,000 pages of testimony. They looked at all of the evidence involving voter discrimination in the jurisdictions that had been covered by Section 5, and they determined that the same coverage formula that had been used for Section 5 needed to be extended. And now the Supreme Court has said that that coverage formula is unconstitutional. We believe that Congress is in a better position than the Supreme Court to determine how voting discrimination plays out in this country. We're disappointed, but now the ball is in Congress's court. We should be turning our attention and our cameras across the street, because it's now Congress's time to do what it has done so many times in the past: come together, Republicans and Democrats, to reauthorize, to enact, or to amend the Voting Rights Act to ensure the protection of minority voters in this country. This is a critical issue of democracy. This speaks to the very core of American values. This decision by the court today is a game changer and leaves virtually unprotected minority voters in communities all over this country. I hope that when you're reporting on this case, you will remember that your focus and your attention should not be on Washington. Your focus and your attention should be on the town councils and the school board districts and the county commission districts and the water districts and the utility districts all over this country, particularly in the South, where minority voters struggle to have their voice heard and to be able to participate equally in the political process. This is a critical day for democratic participation in America. We will not soft soap it. This is a real threat, but we believe strongly that Congress can fix it. The Supreme Court in its decision has said that Congress can fix it, and we demand that Congress get to work, that come together, finding a formula that will respond to the Supreme Court's concerns, but that will ensure that minority voters in this country continue to have their voting rights protected and continue to be able to participate equally and fully in the political process.
There are two truths that flow today from the Supreme Court's decision striking the coverage provision of the Voting Rights Act. The first is that it is a substantial act of judicial act of judicial activism and overreach. The court today departed from its own precedent. Over 4 decades, 4 times, this Supreme Court has upheld Section 5 as constitutional and upheld the provision that covers the jurisdictions covered by Section 5 as constitutional. The second truth is this, that there are now millions of minority voters in those places across this country covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which are vulnerable to the types of adaptive and intense and pervasive voting discrimination that Section 5 has protected them from for more than 48 years. The good news is this, that as we are providing these remarks, we are facing the nation's capital, which houses members of Congress. And in 2006, Congress, in an overwhelmingly bipartisan effort, 98-0 in the Senate, 390-33 in the House, voted together to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act for another 25 years. It is the judgment of Congress to reauthorize Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which should stand, and not the overreach of the Supreme Court today. We, as Sherilyn mentioned, call on Congress. In this moment, if there's any moment, it is now that the country can unify around the importance of protecting the voting rights of those voters who've been made most vulnerable by their state's persistent efforts to discriminate against them in the voting process. Congress, in this moment, must take this seriously, must seize this opportunity to, together in a bipartisan way, seek to reenact a measure that will protect the voting rights of those voters who have been vulnerable since 1965 when the Voting Rights Act was first passed.
What's your name?
My name is Ryan Haygood. I'm the director of the Political Participation Group at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Haygood, H-A-Y-G-O-O-D. We are a separate organization from the NAACP. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund was founded by Justice Thurgood Marshall in 1940. We worked very, very closely with the NAACP, but we have since our founding maintained separate boards and are entirely separate organizations.
Good morning, everyone. I am Barbara Arnwine. I'm the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. I am here today to speak to this decision. I want to say 2 things straight up about the decision. One is that it is deeply disturbing because it undermines and puts our democracy at risk. Nothing is more important than ensuring that every single voter is free from racial discrimination and ethnic discrimination in the exercise of their vote. Today's decision severely undermines the legal protections that have been vital for more than almost 5 decades of protecting voters of all nationalities. I also want to say the second problem is that this decision is a betrayal of the American people, that there is nothing more critical than making sure that the highest court of our land gets it right when it comes to what is the appropriate coverage for protecting American people. By striking down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, by saying that the coverage formula is outdated, the court has, in essence, misstepped in tremendous proportions by making that decision when the Congress had 15,000 pages of record that it generated, 21+ hearings. What else could they have done? They looked at these states that were covered. They looked at the fact that over 80% of all lawsuits involving voting rights have been generated from these states. They looked at the fact that these states accounted for over more than 2,000+ findings by the Department of Justice and courts that there have been racial violations and their proposed practices and procedures that were stopped by this act. This great preventative stop sign that is Section 5 now has lost one of its arms. So what we have done today is that we have to go forward. We will, of course, go to Congress. We will ask Congress to do everything that it can to come up with a new coverage formula. We will also have to renew our efforts in the states, because what we have seen of all these new voter suppression laws that have come out in the last couple of years really makes it imperative for there to be a great coverage formula to stop these states from the misdeeds that have plagued our democracy for the last number of years. So I say today to our nation that the fight goes on. I say to our nation that we have to unite like never before to preserve our democracy, and I implore everyone to become active in calling upon their congresspeople to pass a new coverage formula. This court must look to the future. This court must protect every single voter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to say again on behalf of the NAACP, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and also the Lawyers Committee. First, we will be calling on all of our units, NAACP units across the country, to be on lookout and to be on watch for jurisdiction who will try to implement any kind of electoral changes in this interim. With our partners, we will be setting up a national hotline to receive complaints or reports of jurisdictions who will try to take advantage of this interim period. Again, the NAACP, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Lawyers Committee, we will be vigilant even during this interim period, and we will be asking our units, our local units across the country. Again, I thank all of you today. If there are specific questions that you may have for our partners, I ask that you can ask those now.
And Ms. Arnwine, can you talk about what would make you think that Congress could fix this, given the dysfunctional nature of Congress?
Well, Congress has been dysfunctional before. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Congress has been dysfunctional before. This is not the first time. We should remember we're talking about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Congress was not a model of unity at that time, nor was it over the last several reauthorizations of the Voting Rights Act. But we should remember that every time that the Voting Rights Act has been reauthorized, it was signed by President Reagan, it was signed by President Bush, that this is a piece of legislation that we recognize goes to the core of our democracy. And that's why I think it's so important that we recognize what has happened today. Because what has happened today is the ball has been thrown not only in Congress's court, but in our court. Because the reality is the only way Congress will act is if we call, if we march, if we pressure, if we make clear that we do not intend to go backwards on voting. Some of the people standing behind me today, the people with the signs and our interns at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, weren't even born when the Voting Rights Act was enacted. They have lived their whole lives with these protections. They have the settled expectation that they are going to participate in a democracy that protects all voters. Are we prepared now to change that contract that we have with our young people? Are we prepared now to change America and to turn our back on them? I think that it's not only up to Congress, but it's up to us to demand as American citizens that this country will only go forward and will not go backwards. The Supreme Court has failed minority voters today, but now Congress has to do the right thing. And for Congress to do the right thing, the only way they've done it in the past is because we demanded it. And so in many ways, although the ball's in Congress's court, the ball is in our court. And I hope that Americans of all races and of every jurisdiction in this country will feel that they have to stand up for the future of this country, and they have to stand up for democratic participation in this country. When people look at this country and they admire what America has been able to do over the last 50 years, they admire the progress that we made despite our history of slavery and racial discrimination and exclusion. That's what makes us special to the rest of the world. Are we prepared to protect that legacy, or are we willing to let that legacy go? So we call on all Americans. This is not an issue just for civil rights advocates. This is not an issue just for African Americans or for Latinos. This is not just an issue for those in the South. This is the America we have all come to expect and that we have all come to enjoy and become proud of. And the question for us is, are we willing to fight for it? We believe that this is the stance that American voters have to take today in light of the Supreme Court's decision, and they have to pressure Congress to do their job.
Yes. Thank you for your question. Clearly, Congress has the ability to correct this decision today by passing a new coverage formula. It will obviously have to undertake a different kind of consideration than it did in 2006, meaning that it's going to have to go state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and make specific findings. What I think is important is that for every person in America, we pride ourselves on our democracy. We pride ourselves on the American people's ability to go to the polls and to elect the candidates of their choice. It is absolutely imperative that if you believe and care about your democracy, that today you stand up and you say to your congressman, to your senator, that this decision is wrong, and that you want to make sure that every American has the right to vote. So you demand that they pass a new Section 4 that will answer the court's demands and will protect everyone. It is absolutely imperative. We will spend the next how many ever months it takes, the next how many ever years it takes. We will not sit down. We will not be silent. We will not accept the evisceration of our rights. We will fight every step of the way to make sure that voting rights are available to every single American, and we will use every tool, legally, organizationally, mobilization. We will do whatever is necessary to protect the rights of each and every American citizen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Leading
Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1092, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 30, H.R. 1092, a bill to designate the Air Route Traffic Control Center located in Nassau, New Hampshire as the Patricia Clark Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The last vote of the day on a bill to name an air traffic control center in Nashua, New Hampshire. Later on this week in the House, members will work on 2 offshore oil and gas drilling bills, including one dealing with drilling along the U.S.-Mexico maritime boundary in the Gulf of Mexico. Here's more about those bills. Environment and Energy Daily. What's the purpose of the offshore oil and gas drilling bills that are coming up in the House this week?
Well, we're seeing 2 bills coming to the floor. The first one would codify an agreement between the United States and Mexico that would allow access to an area about the size of New Jersey offshore for drilling. And that one is one that we see some bipartisan agreement on and may have a future in the Senate. But there is a provision that the House Republicans have added that would basically prevent the administration from going through with a rule forcing the oil and gas industry to disclose its royalty payments to foreign governments for mineral rights. So that's a sticking point that could kind of stop this bill cold, even though both parties in both chambers support it. And the second bill is a more Republican partisan GOP bill that would expand offshore drilling. It's similar to legislation that passed under Republican control last year, but ended up stalling in the Senate.
You mentioned the Republicans. What about the Democrats? What are they saying about the measures?
Well, Democrats, as I mentioned, aren't necessarily opposed to the U.S.-Mexico transboundary drilling bill, the first of these 2 bills coming up. But, you know, they want this language on the international payments for oil and gas companies to be stripped because, you know, it's an issue that's pending at the SEC, and there's actually some legal challenges going on between the oil and gas industry and the SEC over this disclosure rule. So Democrats would love it if these two issues could be separated, and then they might support the measure. The second bill on expanding offshore drilling is really opposed by the majority of Democrats, and will just kind of be used to message kind of both sides' energy perspectives.
How much oil and gas is located in those areas being proposed for the drilling?
Well, you know, there's a lot of difference of opinion on that. You know, Democrats have sort of challenged some of the math that's used to estimate the size of these resources. But Republicans, you know, are saying there could be hundreds of millions of barrels. And it's important to remember in this second bill that would expand drilling, we're talking about areas in the Atlantic, Pacific, and in offshore Alaska that would see leases open. So it's a pretty considerable amount.
What's the energy industry saying about the bills?
The energy industry is very supportive of both bills. You know, this agreement that was signed between the U.S. and Mexico, it's more than a year old now. So I think all sides, including the administration, are pretty eager to get it codified in legislation. But of course, they also want to see, you know, any chance they can get to undo this SEC rule on the disclosure. So, you know, Lisa Murkowski, who's the top Republican for energy in the Senate, ranking member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, has said that she might be willing to explore, you know, taking out the SEC language and tackling that separately. So I think the industry might be willing to accept that because, you know, Senator Murkowski is seen as a good arbiter of their interests.
What about the Obama administration? What's their take on the Republican effort to boost oil and gas drilling in those areas?
The administration would likely not support the second bill that expands the oil and gas drilling in the Atlantic, Pacific, and in Alaska. They've opposed, as I said, that similar measure that passed the House last year. All signs point to them being very much for the U.S.-Mexico legislation if the SEC language can be removed.
Alana Shore is a staff reporter for Environment and Energy Daily. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Later, after the House goes out, we'll have all of our coverage of today's Supreme Court ruling on the voting rights case. And the court's expected to hand down other decisions tomorrow, including one on same-sex marriage. And Saturday, we'll have live remarks from Chief Justice John Roberts as he talks about his life and career on the High Court. Before his comments, we'll bring you a panel discussion with former Solicitor General Theodore Olson and former New York Times Supreme Court correspondent Linda Greenhouse. They'll discuss the Supreme Court's 2012 term and what cases to look forward to in the fall. That's live Saturday at 9 a.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN.
On this vote, the yeas are 391, the nays are 3, and 1 is present. Hold the vote.
Mr. Delaney. Mr. Delaney votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 392, the nays are 3, and 1 is present. 2/3 being affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek to be recognized?
I ask unanimous consent that my name be removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 1213.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The gentleman is correct. The House will be in order. I ask all members to take their conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. Would all members please take their conversations off the House floor? The House will be in order. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express my frustration and disappointment with President Obama's war on coal. This war on coal is a war on the middle class. It's a war on good-paying jobs, and it's a war on American prosperity. You cannot pay for our critical social safety net programs unless you have a growing economy. You will not have a growing economy without low-cost American energy. President Obama's new regulations will shutter coal mines and power plants. It will raise energy costs and significantly impact moms and dads sitting around the kitchen table paying their monthly utility bills. It is time for President Obama to stop forcing Americans out of work and to stop giving a leg up to foreign competitors like China. It is time for President Obama to take his hand off the dimmer switch for the American economy. It is time to end this war on low-cost American energy so that Americans can grow, prosper, and shine brightly once again. I thank the Speaker and I yield back.
For what purpose does the member from Indiana, the gentleman from Indiana, seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to congratulate the 2013 Stanley Cup champion Chicago Blackhawks. Last night, sorrow quickly turned to joy when the Hawks netted 2 goals in 17 seconds late in the game to avoid a Game 7. The crowd at Palmer Place in the Grange erupted as Chelsea Dagger played, and we celebrated a second cup in 4 years.
Congratulations especially to Captain Jonathan Toews, Conn Smythe Trophy winner Patrick Kane, and goalie Corey Crawford. But it was truly a team victory. From all the players on the ice, to Coach Q, to GM Stan Bowman, to owner Rocky Wirtz. The entire organization deserves to be commended, and I thank all of them for once again making us proud. I also want to congratulate the Boston Bruins for the great season and a hard-fought final befitting an original six matchup. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to join me in congratulating the Chicago Blackhawks, and I look forward to seeing the Cup back in Chicago. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today the President declared war on America's energy. The administration issued an imperial-style edict ordering the EPA, in essence, to shut down domestic energy, oil, natural gas, and coal. Never mind the consequences. By shutting down coal, for instance, he's shutting down 37% of America's energy. But he doesn't care that Congress has rejected this policy in the past. He just wants it his way. Well, he won't get it without a fight. I have introduced the Ensuring Affordable Energy Act. This bill will put an end to the backdoor monarch-style administration that ignores Congress and circumvents the will of the people. The bill would prohibit any EPA funds from being used to implement the regulation of greenhouse gases. The White House's new war on energy will only raise the cost for our families, cripple the economy, and put Americans out of work. This war is out of touch with the real world. It's a war against America that Americans can't afford to lose. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute and to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
No American should live in fear of becoming a victim of a violent hate crime. In my role as the former lead hate crimes prosecutor for the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, I saw firsthand the devastating impact that hate crimes can have on our communities. Sadly, since taking office, I have heard from constituents and leaders from the Hindu, Sikh, and Arab American communities about the ongoing threats that they face. That is why, in March, I sent a letter to the FBI Advisory Policy Board requesting that the FBI add 3 additional hate crime categories to track anti-Hindu, anti-Sikh, and anti-Arab American hate crimes. Gathering this information will encourage the affected community members to report hate crimes to law enforcement and will help strengthen relationships among communities, local and state law enforcement, and the FBI. I'm happy to report that the Policy Board followed up on my letter and has recommended that FBI Director Robert Mueller make these additions. Our progress towards addressing heinous hate crimes is possible because of groups like the Hindu American Foundation, who have been tireless advocates for the safety of their communities. I urge Director Mueller to act swiftly on the Policy Board's recommendations. This important step would extend protections to millions of Americans. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Ask consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I rise in recognition of National Post-Traumatic Disorder Day. PTSD is a serious mental condition affecting many of our nation's servicemen and women, both past and present. Up to 20% of those that have been returning from Iraq and Afghanistan are at risk of dealing with PTSD, and their personal battles can continue far beyond their time spent overseas. I'd like to especially recognize the Minnesota National Guard and their Beyond the Yellow Ribbon program and their initiative in this area. This comprehensive and very unique program has helped many of our returning servicemen and women with their transition to home life, and it has inspired programs around the country to ensure our military members and families have the support they need after they leave active service. So let's continue to do what we need to support our veterans in their time of need and ensure that they have the best services and care available to them upon their return home, especially those that are suffering from dealing with PTSD. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to speak to the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, An enemy of religious freedom who has a hotline to the Pentagon is at it again. Mikey Weinstein is still fighting to prevent our military personnel from expressing their religious beliefs. Last week in a rant, Weinstein referred to Christians as bigoted slime balls, homophobes, Islamophobes, and carpetbaggers for Christ who spout twisted Christian jihad poison and who committed spiritual rape and are faith-based racist. The First Amendment protects Weinstein's right to such words of hatred against Christians. Unfortunately, he has high-level influence with the Pentagon. Bragging that he made a threatening phone call and within an hour the Air Force rushed to remove a piece of artwork from a dining hall that referred to a Bible verse that said simply, "Blessed are the peacekeepers." I now officially and publicly call upon DOD to stop following Weinstein's anti-First Amendment orders and return him to the status of an ordinary citizen where he belongs. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman or gentlewoman from West Virginia seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to condemn President Obama's announcement that he is going to forge ahead with the war on coal. The President's own climate advisor shed some light on the administration's plan for coal when he said, and I quote, "A war on coal is exactly what's needed." Well, I'm here to tell you that is not what West Virginia or this nation needs. Not only will these regulations put good, hard-working West Virginians out of a job, but they will drive up the cost of electricity for our consumers at a time when the economy is still so weak. The President failed to get his environmental agenda through Congress for a reason. Congress recognized the effects it would have on our nation's economy. Yet, despite our opposition and common sense, the President has decided on unilaterally on this job-killing agenda. By dictating these devastating regulations, the President will shut down existing coal plants and the development of clean coal technology facilities. Not only will his decision hamstring our nation's ability to become energy independent, but it will prove devastating for American workers and in particular for our West Virginia families. Mr. President, don't turn the lights out on our nation's economy.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Obama administration's excessive regulatory actions have been taking their toll on the nation's economy for some time now. Unfortunately, the President's new climate change plan announced today appears even more costly and contentious than his previous proposals, which were resoundingly rejected by his Democratic colleagues in the Senate. America needs a diverse supply of low-cost and abundant energy sources. Coal is by far the cheapest and most abundant source of energy. Protecting the environment and developing our abundant natural resources, such as coal, are not mutually exclusive, but that's not what the President would have us believe. The Obama administration continues to grossly underestimate the cumulative impact of their regulatory actions, and this new plan to unilaterally impose new energy regulations will cost more jobs and further harm family budgets through higher electricity prices. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I too am here to discuss the President's war on coal. The President would have you believe that we must choose between the environment and affordable, reliable energy, but that is not the case. There is a better way, and the President could even take some credit. Based on research that is currently out there, there are technologies that the Department of Energy has invested in on clean coal, which will make a huge difference and will allow us to use our abundant coal resources and protect the environment. But instead of focusing on those possibilities and focusing on that, the President instead wants to regulate coal out of existence. The timelines that will be set up will not allow this new technology to take place in a time frame that will work for the American public and for our economy. So, folks, there is a better way, and I urge the President to stop the war on coal and seek the better path. And with that, I yield back.
The Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Kaufman of Colorado for today, Mr. Engel of New York for today, Mr. Lamborn of Colorado for today, Mrs. McMorris Rogers of Washington for today and for the balance of the week, Mr. Sanford of South Carolina for today, and Mr. Stewart of Utah for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Other speakers announced policy of January 3rd, 2013. The gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity for this 1 hour. Joining me tonight will be Mark Takano from my state of California. We just heard 4 or 5, 10 minutes of talk about the energy issue, and I'd like to put a slightly different face on it. It's not the main subject matter of this hour, which is really about jobs and how education fits into that. But this is sort of along the line, and it follows directly on what my Republican colleagues were talking about, denying that there is real climate change going on. We can no longer deny the fact that we are, as human beings, over this last century, putting into the atmosphere a vast amount of carbon dioxide that is changing our environment. What I want to spend just a moment on here is to discuss how education fits into this issue of climate change. It's an area in which the institutions of higher learning and students play an enormously important role combating climate change and developing a clean energy economy. Today, as we just heard from our Republican colleagues, President Clinton outlined a plan to address the threat of climate change. And he recognizes what the scientists have said, that during 2013, this year, we'll have another record year for climate problems. Deadly flooding, superstorms, droughts, and impacts on sensitive species are just a sampling of the dire consequences that climate change is already bringing to America and the rest of the world. In my district, home to the University of California, Davis, vitally important research is already being carried out to rise to the challenge of climate change. This research ranges from how changes in our climate are going to negatively impact agriculture and native California fish, flora, and fauna, and what we can do about it. Just this month, Dr. Daniel Sperling of the University of California, Davis Institute of Transportation Studies was one of 2 recipients of the 2013 Blue Planet Prize for his monumental work in clean transportation, hydrogen fuel infrastructure, and research on how we can achieve a 100% renewable energy economy for the globe and for America. The expansion of the clean energy section would also play a very, very important role in what we will fundamentally discuss here today, which is creating jobs and spurring economic growth. Recent research indicates that the revenue generated from clean energy globally within the next 5 years will create $1.9 trillion of revenue. Studies also show that states with larger green energy sectors are much more economically sound post-recession. We're on the right track. Last year, California led the national record for the most jobs created in the green energy sector, with over 26,000 new jobs being created. It's evident that we have the building blocks in place to make the changes that are needed for our future, especially in my home state of California. As Dr. Sperling said, solutions are all around us, and indeed they are. Now let me just go on into how that fits into our common agenda here, an agenda that we speak about every week, or nearly every week, and we're talking about making it in America. And there are these 7 things that are involved in the Make It in America agenda. Trade policy, critically important, not the subject for tonight, but the trade policy of the United States as it affects jobs and bringing jobs back to America. Taxes, tax policy exceedingly important. I don't think the American public knew that prior to 2 years ago, American corporations were rewarded for offshoring jobs. When the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives, we eliminated some $16 billion annual tax reductions that American corporations had to offshore jobs. The energy issues. That's not the subject for tonight, but given what our Republican colleagues were talking about and my little 1 minute here, that is a major issue. And we know that the green energy economy creates jobs. The old coal economy doesn't. Labor issues, the value of labor, rebuilding the middle class. Research, critically important, but not the subject for tonight. And infrastructure, which is often our subject, we'll put off till next week. What we want to talk about tonight is education. We want to talk about the role of education in rebuilding the American economy. A critical part of the education issue is something that's going to happen in 5 days. At the end of this month, on July 1st, 2013, thousands upon thousands, indeed millions of students across the United States that have received Stafford loans are going to see a doubling of their interest rate. An interest rate that will go from 3.4 to 6.8%. An incredible burden on the students across the entire nation, some who have finished school, others who are about to finish school, or maybe just finished their graduation ceremonies, are going to be greeted with a doubling of their interest rates. On the Democratic side of the aisle, we've put forth, and more than 200 of us have already signed up for a effort to bring to the floor a solution to this problem. So we want to talk about that tonight. We want to talk about the Democratic solution to avoid this extraordinary problem that will be faced by millions of students who have graduated and have just picked up their degree this month. Joining me tonight for this discussion is Mark Takano, a newly elected representative from the state of California who represents the University of California Riverside campus. Mark, please join us. Take up that microphone in front of you and tell us how this affects your district and the students in your district.
Well, I thank my colleague, Mr. Garamendi of California. We both are Californians. What this will do is put many of my students who are already burdened with a great deal of debt load from the University of California, but there are many students who bear even a greater debt load because they attend some of the private universities in my area. Many of my students leave my district for other schools and are going to out-of-state schools. The student loan debt is I think, a hugely serious problem. Before I came to the Congress, I was a teacher for 23 years. I taught high school, and I always tried to counsel my students to be careful about the debts they took on. I would like to let my colleague know that when I was graduating from high school in the late 1970s, and I graduated, I went on to an Ivy League school on the East Coast. A package at the Ivy League school put together a contribution from my parents, some work study, but my total loan indebtedness from 4 years of Harvard College did not exceed $15,000. That was an amount that I could fairly easily manage. I am just horrified that students are racking up debts of, for undergraduate study, $80,000, $100,000 worth of debt, let alone the debt they're going to have to incur when they go on to their master's programs. A doubling of the interest rates would add just a tremendous burden to these students.
We could just take a very quick look at the math. If it's a $100,000 debt and it's 3.4%, and you're just paying just the interest rate, not the principal of the loan, you're talking about $3,400 a year that you'd be paying at the current rate. Double it, you're talking $6,800 a year. So just that alone, without the paying down the principal, you're looking at a very significant burden on a person that's leaving school, graduating just this year. We need to deal with that. And the effort that's underway here by the Democrats in Congress and also by President Obama, who has put forth, I think, a very solid program, gives the students an opportunity. This is a very interesting chart here, Mark, and I think it's one that you're aware of, and I know you've paid off your loan now, but that student hasn't.
I did actually take on some more debt to get my